We have had an array of persons leading us in different elements of worship this morning. This has been Senior Adult Weekend at our church. Friday evening had a wonderful banquet for our senior adults where we celebrated their ministry to us and with us. This morning they are participating in many of the leadership roles during worship. I thought it would be appropriate to begin with a story about a senior adult this morning, although this senior adult in no way reflects any of our senior adults. I just want to make that clear. Her name was Maddie. She was in her 90s. She was in good health and still driving. She was one of the church members at First Baptist Church, Baxley. One particular morning, just before Sunday school, another member came to me and said, "I think you might want to go check on Maddie." And I asked why. And they said, because we saw her run into a tree just before Sunday school with her car. And so I went down to the senior adult ladies' Sunday school class, and I peeked in, and I said, "Maddie, are you all right?" And she said, "I'm all right. Nothing's wrong with me." I said, "Okay." So I left and went on about my business for the day. That afternoon, I thought I might need to stop by her house and just check, because several people said she did indeed run her car into a tree in the parking lot. And so I pulled into Maddie's home driveway. I walked into her carport, and her car was smashed into the wall in the front of her carport and looked like it had been hit several times. And I knocked on the door, and she let me in. I'd never been to Maddie's home before. There were paper plates, used paper plates, stacked by the hundreds. There were aluminum foil wads in boxes and bags, newspapers stacked to look like pedestals around the room. And I said, "Maddie, I just wanted to check on you. Some of our church members said that you hit a tree today in the church parking lot, and it looks like you've run your car into your garage wall as well." And she just perked up real spry and said, "Well, yeah." She said, "Brother Jim, the brakes don't work on the car anymore, and I have to hit things to stop." And I said, "Well, I think I would get those fixed, Maddie." She said, "Oh, no, I can't afford to fix them. They told me how much it was going to cost." And apparently she was saving money by running into things and saving money by saving newspapers and plates and foil. We call people like this hoarders sometime. Maddie was one of the wealthiest ladies in our town. Had sold a family business years before, banked enough to live in luxury for the rest of her life, but she saved paper plates and drove her car into trees because she lived with a mindset of scarcity. Now, some of you know what I'm talking about. She grew up with the idea that there will never be enough. Maddie grew up during the Great Depression, and she held memories of dresses made out of cotton sacks and the ration of sugar and other essentials. She lived with a sense of scarcity. There will never be enough. Living with a mindset of scarcity, and we've all known people that live that way, often leads to grabbing everything that you can, holding on to whatever you can hold on to. People who live with a sense of scarcity lose the ability to completely enjoy their life as it's been gifted to them. They lose a real sense of generosity because they can't give, because they're scared they won't have. And at the core, and it's not a bad thing, it's not a sinful thing, it's just at the core, there's this inability to trust God. And so we live in scarcity. Jesus lived in a region, and Jesus lived in a culture that lived with a sense and the reality of scarcity. First century Palestine is not modern Palestine. It was a poor farming area. The most common parable out of that era is the parable of the sower and the seed, who threw seed on rocky ground and seed on shallow ground and seed on thorny ground, and just a fourth of the seed on good ground, because less than a fourth of the ground in Israel is good ground. It's a desert. It's a terrible place to farm. Now, in recent eras, they have become an agriculturally techno-savvy country that can farm in that area, but on its own, it's a place of scarcity. One good freshwater lake, one river flowing in and out of it, that's the water for the whole nation. It's a desert. And the people of Palestine knew scarcity. And in the middle of that context, Jesus says to them in Matthew 6, "Consider the birds of the air, and consider the lilies of the field, and consider these little patches of grass that we have all around us. Don't live from a place of scarcity." Now, most of us, we do not live from a perspective of scarcity. Now, there are some here who have hit hard times, and so you've embraced some of that perspective in your life. Even our church went through some hard financial times years ago, but now that things are stable and healthy, we still sometimes slip into a mentality of scarcity, don't we? We fear giving or spending or sharing because we know what it was like to lose and not have. But for the most part, we don't live with scarcity. That's not our perspective. Our perspective is another perspective that's presented here in Matthew chapter 6, and our challenge is another challenge in life, and that is the challenge of abundance. Norman Wiersbe, in his book Making Peace with the Land, calls it the abundant mirage. We think there will always be enough. We have a sense of abundance that other people do not have. If scarcity says there will never be enough, abundance, the abundant mirage says there will always be more than enough. And that's where we live. Now, some of you are already spinning and going, Jim. I don't live that way. Yes, you do. In fact, we have lived that way so long, we are so used to this mentality that we rarely see it in ourselves unless someone else points it out to us. So last night I attended my first Clemson game. And this is the only thing I'm going to say about that. First of all, Jenna said, we've got to leave like at 1 o'clock. I said, does it take 6 hours to drive to Clemson? He said, well, no, you have to tailgate. And so I went tailgating. There was a decadent amount of food, a decadent abundance of beverages, a variety of clothing and non-clothing, whatever all that was. There were televisions mounted on the back of trucks hooked to generators with satellite dishes on top of the automobiles so that we didn't have to just watch Clemson games. We could watch any game we wanted to all afternoon and all day long. If you go to Clemson football games and you do not tithe, you are going to hell. Have to throw that out there. Yeah. Just as a footnote, I was listening to my voice messages this week, and there's this one or two people who call every week, and they talk so loud Jenna can hear them in her office, and they're preachers, and they don't like me particularly. And one of them called this week on Wednesday morning and left a message that said, "Brother, I'm a preacher, and I've listened to you on the radio, and you don't preach about hell, you don't believe in hell, and you are going to hell." So I just told that story for him. I just thought it'd be a good. We live with so much abundance. We've gotten so used to it that we can't really acknowledge it or even recognize it until someone points it out to us. And so Michael came from Liberia, his first trip to the United States, and I picked him up from the designated point, and we drove up the interstate, and wide-eyed, he was looking at this mass of cars and 10 lanes of traffic and beautiful roads. And we stopped by the grocery store before going home so I could pick up some things for supper, and he's walking wide-eyed down the aisles, and he finally speaks his first words in 45 minutes. He said, "Is there always this much food here? Just shelf after shelf after shelf?" I attended a World Hunger Symposium at Crescent Hill Baptist Church in Louisville several years ago. We'd been in meetings all morning long. We broke for lunch. I got in my car after hearing all of these statistics about world hunger, pulled onto the street to drive downtown to eat at my favorite restaurant in Louisville, and the first billboard I saw was a restaurant billboard that said, "All-you-can-eat buffet, $7.99. I was sitting with a farmer from an outskirting community of our city about a month ago, And he was telling me how far removed we have gotten from the land, that we don't even know where food comes from anymore. We have no idea what a grain field looks like, but we expect our bread and our cereal to be on a shelf every time we go to the grocery store. We live with a sense of abundance, that there will always be enough. And in some ways, it leaves us with the same struggles that scarcity leaves us. When you live with abundance, you still start holding on to everything you can grab and hoarding everything you have, consuming and overusing and living with a lack of generosity because we just assume there'll always be enough, so why do I have to give more and more and more? We still end up with a lack of trust in God. We end up with this thought that, well, I earned this. This is mine, rather than all of these things have been gifts from God. And how does Jesus address these extremes in the text today? He settles on this one verse you've heard all your life. It's almost become too familiar. He says, so here's what you do. You seek first the kingdom of God, and all of these other things will be added to you. The first thing you remember is that we are a kingdom, which is by definition plural. It is a community, a place where resources are shared and enjoyed, not hoarded and held. It's why we conclude our supper each Sunday that we share communion by saying, has everyone been fed? It's a reminder that everyone in this building needs to have been fed, and that there are people outside this building that still need to be fed. We are a part of a kingdom, a community. And it is the kingdom of God. Seek first the kingdom of God, a community built on trust in God, built on God's provision to us. The Lord's Supper is a vivid reminder of a balance that we have to strike between these ideas of scarcity and abundance. If you think about it, at the Lord's Supper, things probably felt scarce. Jesus' time with his disciples was scarce. Grace might have felt scarce. Security might have felt scarce. And yet at that table, there was an abundance of food and an abundance of grace. And that's what we share today.